Hey guys, let's talk about Thomas Hardy. He's our first 20th century author that we're reading. However, Thomas Hardy is really interesting. He was born in 1840, died in 1928, and he really straddles the Victorian era and the 20th century. Matter of fact, some books would put him in the Victorian era, some books would put him in the 20th century. Nearly all of his poetry was published post-1900, and nearly all, or I believe all of his novels were published before then. So it's almost like his novels had one foot back in the Victorian era and his poetry had one foot in the 20th century. So he straddles those eras, and we can see in his writing a lot of elements of both eras. He was initially apprenticed to an architect, but he pursued fiction because it interested him. After some early failures as a writer, he garnered some success as a writer and gave up architectural work altogether. Two things you should know about him. Critics often level at Hardy that he's pessimistic and that his poetry and his writing are pessimistic. He said back, he considered himself a meliorist, and he says it's someone who believes the world can be made better by human effort. So, I don't know. I read his poetry and I think, I don't know, Hardy, this is kind of dark, my friend, it's a little dark. But you may read it and see that there are some glimmers of hope. And I think that you can look for that too, and you might see that too. One thing that is interesting about Hardy, this other thing that's interesting about Hardy, is that he seriously considered becoming an Anglican priest, but then suffered a serious loss of faith. And I think you might sense that sadness or that frustration of that faith crisis in his work. But that's also indicative of much of the mood of the 20th century, when God is being challenged, when faith is losing its high status and its untouchability. So his poetry and this sort of personal loss of faith really reflect these broader things that were happening in the early 20th century. Look for the way that God behaves in channel firing. Consider Hardy's pessimistic, melioristic view of the world and Darkling Thrush. And then in The Convergence of the Twain, this is an amazing poem written about the Titanic, and it's not pessimistic and dark. It's almost like mysterious and heavy in the way that he writes about the Titanic and an iceberg sort of being fated to come together, So enjoy these poems. They're all really excellent poems. And consider how his work and the themes you see in those poems really embody what we're moving into with the 20th century. Because guys, I hate to tell you, but it only gets darker for a little while. All right, enjoy Hardy.